Perspective welcomed two members of the North Carolina State Legislature, Sarah Crawford, a Democrat representing House District 66, and Rep.Paré, a Republican representing House District 37. We also had Joe Stewart, the Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina, back for a second time as a guest moderator. The conversation covered everything from running for office in a competitive district to key bipartisan legislation and even the long-standing disputes over partisan gerrymandering. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Spencer. Thank all of you for coming today. I thought this would be a great opportunity for you to hear from two people whose districts include a part of Wake County, so they are representatives of this part of the state, to talk a little bit about the experience of serving in the General Assembly and how it is the process works that an idea becomes law, but also because Representative Crawford is a Democrat and Representative Paré is a Republican, have them share with you a little the fact that there is a lot more cooperation that goes on between legislators of different parties than one might perceive based on the way that politics is often covered by the press. So as a starting point, Representative Paré, why don't you talk a little bit about your background and what inspired you to run for the General Assembly in the first place?
Okay, so my background is I'm originally from Northern Virginia in the Washington, D.C. area. So I got my master's degree at George Mason University up in the Arlington area. And after that, I went into government affairs. So I was a registered lobbyist for about 7 years. And so I worked on Capitol Hill. So I have a background in public policy and also politics. I decided to move on when I met my husband, who was an active duty infantry officer with the Army. He was an Army Ranger. And so we got married, and as many military spouses do, you kind of put your career on the back burner to support the mission and support his career. At the time, it was, he was active duty and deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. So we traveled the country for 12 years as a military family, raised our kids, and then we ended up settling in North Carolina in Holly Springs when he was at JSOC down at Fort Bragg, which is now Fort Liberty. So I got involved in my community. I was a PTA president. We opened a business. It's called Play It Again Sports in Holly Springs. So we own that if anybody's familiar with Play It Again Sports. Started a nonprofit youth orchestra and served on a town board. So just those experiences sort of led me to think, hey, there's an opportunity for me to run in this area and do some good work at the state level for my community. And so I ended up running for office for the first time, was in a 3-way primary and moved to the general and then won the general in a really tight race. So that's why I'm here, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Representative Crawford?
Yeah, do you want to? Sure. Is this good? Okay. Well, I'm Sarah Crawford. I don't know. Did y'all hear what Representative Paré said mostly? Okay. Good. Okay, good. So I'm Sarah Crawford. I represent House District 66, which is a little more east of here, kind of the Wakefield, North Raleigh area. And my background is primarily government and nonprofits. And so when I was in college, I started to get really interested in politics and government and ended up going to work for a member of Congress, David Price. And I worked for Congressman Price, both in his Raleigh office. I went up to Capitol Hill and worked in Washington, D.C. and did some legislative work up there, and then ended up coming back and working on his campaign, where I learned a new skill set that has served me well, and that's fundraising. And I kind of took all that experience in government and fundraising and decided that I really wanted to work in nonprofits. And so I've worked in the areas primarily of health and human services. I worked at Duke Children's Hospital. I worked at Tammy Lynn Center twice. I'll come back to that. And I have also done some work at the intersection of social services and higher education, helping students get connected to benefits and resources so that they can stay in school. Most recently, I serve as CEO at Tammy Lynn Center for Developmental Disabilities. We are a nonprofit organization that's been around for 55 years, serving children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities through a wide array of programs that include residential, therapeutic services, care management, diagnostic assessments, and kind of anything that you might need if you are somebody with disabilities or have a loved one with disabilities. We serve the whole family. And I decided in 2014 is when I first ran for office And I got asked to run, to which I initially said, that sounds like a crazy idea. No, thank you. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, we really need leaders in our General Assembly who look more like the people that we represent. And that includes women, mothers, which we both are, people who have had to put a budget together or to make ends meet to support their families, and people who really understood the community. And I had done that work in the congressional office, serving constituents, doing that legislative work, and then also at my work at Tammy Lynn Center, seeing firsthand the role that these important services provide and how when government is working well, it can work really well for the community. I happened in 2014 to lose that election, and I would recommend, if you're ever going to run for office, try really hard not to lose. It was not fun. But I learned a lot in that experience, ended up through a process getting drawn out, drawn back in, and then decided to run again in 2020, ran for state senate, won that election, served in the Senate for 2 years, got drawn out of that district, drawn into a new open house district where I ran for that in a 3-way primary, barely won the primary, and then went on to win the general. People ask me all the time, which chamber do I like serving in better? And I know that this is being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. I love the House. I love serving in the House. I mean, the Senate is great, and I love all the people in the Senate, but I just have found a lot more opportunities to work across the aisle to really get things done in the House. So I'm excited to be here.
All right, Representative Crawford, we'll come right back to you. People see in movies and television a little bit how politics works. Most of that's a fictionalized account. What is it really like being a candidate for elective office? What is an average day like, and what are the things you do to win office?
Yeah. So, I think there are differences in the races. So, you have competitive seats, and then you have seats that are not so competitive. And I have run in both types of races. And so I'll talk a little bit about being in a competitive seat. You have to wake up every single day when you're running for office, especially in a competitive seat, thinking about how you can leave it all on the field so that you don't wake up the day after the election, if you lost, and think, gosh, what if I had only done this other thing? Maybe I would have won. And, that's what I did in 2014. And I can say that I woke up Wednesday morning and did not feel like I had left anything undone or any stone unturned. And so you really do, my typical day. So a lot of us that serve in the General Assembly is a part-time job with full-time responsibility. And because it's a part-time job with part-time pay, a lot of us also have other jobs. I have a full-time job in addition to this job. And so my day in a competitive seat looked like I would get up, I would work my day job from about 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., try to get as much done as I could, leave at 3 and do campaign fundraising from like 3 until 9 almost, and raise money. And sometimes, you would go to, I would go to different events, talk to voters. Your main 2 priorities as a candidate is to meet voters and raise money. So that's all you do for 11 months, roughly, sometimes longer. The cycle's getting a little bit longer and longer now as we go through time. So, it's a lot of work. And then I would get home at 10 o'clock, go to bed, and do it all again. And in 2014, my children were very young. They were 2 and 4 when I started the race, 3 and 5 when I didn't win. And so it was a lot of juggling responsibility and leaning a lot on the people that helped to make our lives work, like my parents and my husband.
Yeah, Representative Paré, your experience as a candidate.
Yeah, so I represent an area that has always been a competitive seat, and what I strive to do is not make it as not much non-competitive as possible. So when I was elected, at first in 2020, I was elected with a little over 3% of the vote. I ran for re-election in 2022, won by nearly 8%. In 2024, I won by about 6.5%, something like that. So I'm trying to always resonate with my voters. As Sarah, or Representative Crawford, sort of alluded to, over the years, the districts have changed a little bit. So the district through redistricting the district I ran in 2020 is very different from the district that I represent now. And so in Wake County, as you probably know, it's a fast-growing area. I represent the southern portion of the county. So that area is very fast growing. So we have people moving here all the time. We have a lot of economic development happening in Southern Wayne County, and the issues change every election. For example, this election, I know that one big problem for the people of Southern Wayne County is how horrible our DMV is. We have a big DMV problem in Southern Wayne County, probably all over Wayne County.
Yeah.
So, when I run for office, and when I legislate, when I serve in the General Assembly, I want to make sure that I am leaning in on the issues that matter to the people that I represent, right? That's our job. So when I talk to voters, I'm talking about the things that I know that matter to them, like their taxes, like education, like the DMV, like safe communities. Those are the things that matter to everybody, regardless if you're a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, etc. So in my race, as Representative Crawford said, I always have to leave no stone unturned and leave everything on the field. So in North Carolina, we have 17 days of early voting, and then we have election day. I'm always like the next election for me has already begun. I won my election. I'm already now starting to look forward to the next election. And raising money is just a reality of it. You have to have money in order to run a race. And so fundraising is a big deal for me, as it is for Representative Crawford. But I'm also looking forward to the next election, how I can represent the interests of the vast majority of my constituents the best. And that is regardless of political party. So that's where I am.
All right, we'll stay with you. You run, you win, you show up at the legislative building, and the first thing you have to decide is what committees you might want to serve on. What were the choices you made? Why were those the committees that you were most interested in? And talk a little bit about the issues that you've worked on relative to your service on those committees.
Right. So you can put in for some committees. I know Sarah knows this, like health or something.
Yeah,
you don't necessarily get them. So you sort of, when you win, then there is a process where you can request to be a member of certain committees. And for me, those are committees that I feel strongly about serving on. For example, I'm a military spouse, so I wanted to be a member of the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. I thought I had something to add to that from a military spouse of an active duty soldier perspective. There's finance or appropriation. Usually members are on one of the two of those. I decided that I wanted to be on appropriation because I felt like I had a perspective that I wanted to say where I thought money should be spent in the state. For example, education was important to me, transportation, rules. There's some committees that I want to be on this time that I wasn't on last time. I think transportation is one of those for me. I'm going to ask for that just because, as everybody can see, there's a traffic problem in Wake County, especially Southern Wake County. So I like to lead on that for the people that I represent. So I think that you have to think about your constituency, but also what you're interested in and what you maybe have a specialization in. And I think, I was on health last time with Sarah, with Representative Crawford. And of course, she has sort of a background and an interest and a skill set on health. So I'm sure she'll ask for that again. So that's sort of where it's in.
Representative Crawford, your experience?
Yeah, very similar. You in the Senate, I served on healthcare, and in the House, I've also served on healthcare, and I will be seeking that again. But as Representative Paré mentioned, it is a process. So you kind of rank your choices, you put in your choices, you rank them, and then you hope for the best. And then a committee assignments come out, and then you panic because you don't get on the committee you wanted, and you call your friend and you say, I didn't get on healthcare. And she says, well, that's ridiculous. You should absolutely be on healthcare. And so thank you, Representative Paré, for helping to make that happen. And that's what happened in the House. And so I serve on healthcare. I also have served on families, children, and aging on that committee, which is also an area that's very important in my district. There's also a lot of growth in the Wake Forest, Wakefield area. There are also a lot of folks that are aging, and across North Carolina, that's a really important issue for our state. But I also do that work work with children and families in my professional life, and so I bring some expertise to that committee as well.
All right, stay with you, Representative Crawford. What is a typical legislative day like?
Well, it can be different every day. So the one thing that is different about the House than the Senate is that it's not quite as scheduled. The Senate tends to really follow a schedule, particularly in long sessions. So in North Carolina, we have 2-year sessions. We have the long session, which happens in the odd number years, and it will start in January and typically go until July. Sometimes it goes longer. It just kind of depends. My first session ever serving, I think I served in the longest session ever on record. It started in January and ended March, a whole year and a little bit later. We were just like never done. Part-time job. Keep that in mind. Part-time pay. So then we have short session, which is in the years that we have elections, so the even number years, and that usually starts in May and wraps up in June, but also sometimes can go longer. We don't, in North Carolina, we don't have session limits. There are other states that do have session limits. I would be a fan of promoting that, so that we can have those of us who need to work can just have a little bit more, just more consistency. But a typical day, in long session in particular, you'll typically be in session, you can expect Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, typically. And you'll typically in the mornings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, you'll have committee meetings. So that's when most of the time committees will meet. Sometimes that schedule changes too. And then in the afternoons around 2 or 3 o'clock, you'll go into a voting session and actually debate and vote on the legislation that has gone through the committee process. But oftentimes we don't ever know what the schedule is going to be. And so we might not know until Friday of the week before what our schedule is going to be for the week following. So those of us, again, who have children, who have other jobs, really have to just be very flexible. So I try to only schedule things in my day job on Mondays and Fridays, and know that sometimes that will get upended by the voting session as well. So that's just kind of how it works. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, a couple things actually, and I might be taking over your job just a little bit here, but I wanted to clarify something, but I'll answer this first. So if you think about, to put it in perspective, North Carolina has 11 million people now. Mm-hmm. We have 100 counties, and there are 120 members of the House. So you're talking to 2 representatives who live in Wake County, and then we meet in Raleigh. So our commute, mine is about 35 minutes.
About 30,
30 minutes. We have members that are on the western part of the state that have a 4.5-hour commute to Raleigh, or all other parts of the state where they have hours of driving to get to Raleigh for votes or committee meetings. Those members stay overnight in a hotel or an apartment in Raleigh for 3 days or the week or whatever it may be to do their business there. For Sarah and I, or Representative Crawford and I, we just go home every night and sleep in our own bed. So we're sort of lucky in that way. So you got to think about sort of the difference of lifestyle depending on what area of the state that you live in and the area of the state that you represent. But I agree with her. We're both mothers. So I usually go in first thing in the morning and I stay until I have to clean business, clear all our business. I'm lucky because my husband is now, we're business owners, so he's retired from active duty. So his schedule is flexible. And I would not be able to do this job if he did not have a flexible schedule, because I have high school kids, just like you guys, and they have their sports and their school and everything else that life requires for young people like you and your parents. So because of the unpredictable schedule, it has really helped me to have my husband, who does have a flexibility in his schedule, unlike what used to be the case when he was active duty and he had a very rigid schedule and I had to be the flexible one. So those are sort of the family dynamics that help this job work for me and our family. Yeah. But one question I had, if I can, so when Representative Crawford was kind of saying, well, she didn't get on health, that was her background. Why would she come to me and just say, hey, Representative Paré, can you help me with, maybe being assigned to health committee? Why would she come to me? I'm a Republican. She's a Democrat. Right now in North Carolina, the Republicans are in the majority party in the House of Representatives and the Senate. But that could change at some point and probably will change. But right now, those committee assignments are done by the House leadership, when the House leadership is Republican. So when Representative Crawford, I know her background, I've known her for several years. Aaron, can you maybe put in a good word, kind of, sure. then I go to my leadership and say, it probably makes sense that Representative Crawford, given her background, could serve on health. She'd probably be an asset on health. They're going to go, thank you, Representative Paré, and they make a decision based on my input. So I just wanted to clarify.
We'll talk a little bit more about so much of the way that politics is characterized is it's all about the tension between parties. And we all know that there are differences of opinion even within parties. But you both have a great reputation as legislators of being willing to work with people of the opposite party to get things done that you agree on. What is the success behind the initiatives that have been bipartisan? What have you found works most effectively working across the aisle with Democratic colleagues?
Yeah, so I'm of the mind that I think to be a good legislator and to get meaningful legislation done, it is always good to have buy-in from the other side of the aisle. In my district, though, I have about a third Republicans, registered Republicans, third Democrats, and then a lot of unaffiliated voters. And I think the people that I represent really care about the two parties working together to do common sense work for the people of Southern Wake County and North Carolina. And I think that's really important. So I'm going to be honest with you. There are some members on both sides of the aisle that just don't want to work with the other side of the aisle. That just is the case. But there are a lot of people, and I would put Representative Crawford in that bucket, that are willing to cross the aisle and work with you on things that they think is beneficial to the state, and where you can come together and make those decisions and craft good legislation and get it passed, are willing to do that. And so I think there's a number of examples of that. Maybe Representative Crawford can talk about the bill that we did together.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll just add, everything that you do in your entire life, everything you do comes down to relationships. Everything. It doesn't matter what job you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in school or you're not in school. Everything you do comes down to relationships and the quality of those relationships. And so I think, one of the things that I've tried to do, that Representative Paré has tried to do, is to really work to build those relationships and to understand, what's your background, what's my background, how can we work together on these things, and that is one of the reasons that I think, as a Democrat in the minority party, I have been able to get some good pieces of legislation passed. Oftentimes, I do look for a Republican who will be the first primary sponsor on it, and then I'll put my name second or third, which is fine, because it's not about the credit, right? It's about what's best for your district, what's best for the people in North Carolina. And I really live by 3 rules in the General Assembly. The first is control what I can control, which quite frankly isn't a whole lot. So that one's pretty easy. The second is, when there is something that I don't agree with that is best for North Carolina, do what I can to stand up against it. Sometimes that means I speak up against the bill, and sometimes that means I'm just hitting, showing my unhappiness with it by hitting my red button to vote no. And then my third rule is really put my energy and focus into the things that I can get done. And one of those things is finding opportunities to work across the aisle on bipartisan pieces of legislation. And a couple of things that we were able to get done this year, you probably have to speak a little bit more about the Wake County bill. But so we got a bill done. Another couple of bills that we got done that Representative Paré and I worked on together. One was specifically to extend the in-line of duty death benefits to fallen police officers. There was a kind of a weird loophole in the bill that in the law that didn't really make a lot of sense. And so we worked to close that loophole so that law enforcement officers could get the recognition and their families could get the benefits that they deserved when they were fallen in the line of duty. And we got that across the hurdle. We had put in a standalone bill. It didn't pass as it passed the House as a standalone bill, but not the Senate. But we were able to get it into the budget, and that amendment to get it into the budget passed unanimously. And so we got that done for families of fallen officers, which was huge. Do you want to talk about the Wake County bill?
Sure. Okay, so do I have time?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So the Wake County bill. So in Wake County, does everybody live in? I guess everybody lives in Wake County here. Not everybody. Okay, so Does anybody live in Wake County? Okay. Okay, very good. So you have a Wake County Board of Commissioners in Wake County. They do zoning. They're the ones that are raising your property taxes, not us. I want to put that out there because I have to answer that all the time. So,
Still fresh.
Yeah, so great. Anyway, so the Wake County Board of Commissioners, there right now is 7 members of that. And they each are elected by everybody in the county, but they have to live in one of the 7 Wake County Commissioner districts. Okay, you tracking so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so in my area, I represent Southern Wake County. There are 1.2 million people who live in Wake County. Wake County is larger than 8 states. So I would say 3 top largest counties in North Carolina have actual districts, meaning the commissioners are elected only by the people that live in the district they represent, not at large by all 1.2 million people. So essentially how it has worked so far is up in Wake Forest, in the northern part of the county, those voters elect who represents Southern Wake County on the Wake Board of Commissioners. That becomes a problem because the interests of the voters vary depending on what part of the county they live in. So we have densely populated urban areas, we have more rural areas, all within Wake County. So their concerns and their issues and their why they go vote and for who they vote for change depending on what's going on in those communities of interest around the county. So hearing about this for a long time, I actually tried to come to an agreement with the Wake County Commissioners to change how we elect our county commissioners and have it done by district instead of at large. So long story short, there wasn't a lot of support for it until we were able to come to an agreement, which ended up being unanimous, to add 2 at-large seats, but make the district commissioners we have elected by district, which to me provides greater representation to the district of Wake, or the county of Wake. 55% of the electorate resides in Raleigh and Cary. Okay, so those densely populated urban areas have more control come voting time over the whole county, and those sort of more rural areas voices, I think, are a little bit in the shadow. So that's why we did that.
Yeah,
and it's a great example when a matter of public policy is being undertaken. What you have just represented here took a long period of time, a lot of conversations, coming to an agreement with people that maybe didn't agree to begin with. And the making a public policy really necessitates that kind of thoughtful approach. What gets the attention are the angry floor fights over one particular piece of legislation. But in that regard, you worked it through the appropriate public policy making process and were successful.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll just add, so we're in kind of an interesting, I guess it's not anymore, we had been in kind of an interesting situation in Wake County where Representative Paré is the only Republican, or was the only Republican in the Wake County delegation. So everybody else elected in Wake County were Democrats. And so when there was not agreement on the bill, the Democrats were all on this text chain and they were like, well, who has the best relationship with Erin? And I said, well, probably I do. So I'll call her. So we talked about it, and, you know, and we like she mentioned, we got to an agreement. So, but that's another thing that happens kind of even within the delegation. This next session, there will be 2 Republicans and maybe 3 in the delegation. I guess we don't know about the Senate District 18 quite yet, but we'll know tomorrow.
All right, we have a few more minutes. We want to open it up to questions at the end, but real quickly, for anybody here that may aspire to politics, what would be your advice? What are the things that you think a young person should do to prepare themselves for the possibilities of seeking elective office?
Yeah, the number one piece of advice that I give to young folks who are thinking about this is find an issue that you are really passionate about and get involved in that issue, either through a nonprofit or a club or some other organization. Because what it will do is it will help you understand all the facets of that issue, what the pros, the cons, who's on the other side of whatever the issue is that it could be environmental, it could be criminal, social justice issues, it could be things like I work on in the developmental disability field. But get involved, and you will see kind of another side of what's happening in the community that will just, I think, better prepare you for discussions and just help solidify your own perspectives about certain issues. And so I would say get involved. And then the second thing I would say is, find a candidate or an elected official who you feel shares your values, and see if there are opportunities to get engaged either with their campaign or as an intern or as a page at the General Assembly, so that you can kind of see how things work in those arenas as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Representative Crawford on that. I would just add a couple things. I think take advantage of what is publicly available to you, like your town council board meetings. They happen every 2 weeks wherever you live, or something like that. Attend a school board meeting, and you actually don't have to be there in person. You can listen in online to all of this, because you will hear regular people from the community go up and make public comment talking about some issue that matters to them. And it runs the spectrum. And then you're going to learn about something you had no idea was even an issue or a problem or happening in the area in which you live. And any opportunity that you can take advantage of to listen to a lecture or a seminar or a meeting, take those opportunities. Even if you'd rather sleep or whatever it is you do, take those opportunities, because you will benefit from that, even if you think it's going to be the most boring thing in your life. If the police department in your community is having a town hall where they talk about public safety, go there. You'll learn something. You're going to learn something if you just engage yourself in that. But I would also just say, if you are offered an opportunity to sit down and have coffee with somebody or whatever it is you eat or drink, take advantage of it. So those are all opportunities for you to learn even a tidbit of information. And those relationships, like Representative Crawford said, even if it's a 15-minute talk, that person is going to remember who you are, and you're going to remember what they said to you, and that may change the way you think about something. And don't be afraid to listen to the opposing side of wherever you think you are. If you're a Democrat or think you are, or you think you're a Republican or Libertarian or whatever it is, sit down with a Republican, sit down with the Democrat, and listen to what they have to say. Even if you're like, they're crazy, I'm never going to, agree with them. You might. And that will change the way you think about things, even on one topic, or let you think about it a little bit more deeply.
I think we have time for one quick question. Everybody got a super great question to ask? Yeah.
After the conversation, we welcomed a brief Q&A session where a student asked about the representative's thoughts with regard to partisan gerrymandering in the state of North Carolina. Here's what they had to say.
Well, and I'll start. Part of it is important to remember that the requirement is that you take the census data and you apportion the population of the state so that each state house and state senate district is more or less equally the same size and population. But the Constitution also requires, to the extent practicable, that you honor the county boundaries. Some part of the challenge is those county boundaries do not necessarily reflect how population has changed over the years. We've also seen a trend in the last several decades in America, not just in North Carolina, where people increasingly choose to live almost entirely with people they agree with politically. Of the 2,700 precincts, that's the basic building block of politics, where people go to vote, 2,700 precincts in this state. If you look at the historical voting patterns, whether people in that community voted typically for candidates for higher office that are Democrats or Republicans, of the 2,700 precincts, fewer than 24 of them are competitive on a partisan basis. So drawing the districts to some extent is a challenge for all of those reasons, but it has been true through history that district lines are drawn by the majority party. And when the Democrats were in the majority, they drew districts that favored Democrats. And when the Republicans were in charge, they drew districts that were favorable to Republicans, which the court has now determined is not an unfair characterization of how a district can be drawn. So that context.
Yeah, I'll just add that this is not a Republican problem. This is a Democrat problem and a Republican problem. And in North Carolina, our districts have been litigated going back to a ways back, but probably the most notable case until recent years was 1994 with the 12th Congressional District, where it went up kind of I-85. It was the Mel Lott District in those days. And since then, that's when Democrats were in charge of the legislature and drawing the maps. Since then, our maps have been in and out of the courts on multiple levels. But I think the maps we have now are the maps that are going to stay through the rest of this decade. I don't anticipate any changes unless there's some big change in the courts that leverages an opportunity.
It's a great question. And some part of the dynamic that's occurring in North Carolina, both of these representatives mentioned this, the state grows by about 120,000 new residents every year. Of that, about half of all of the new in-migration goes into just Wake and Mecklenburg counties. So our big communities like Wake and Charlotte and Raleigh, those will continue to pick up legislative and congressional districts because more and more people are living in those urban centers.
Yeah. I think keeping counties whole too, when you brought that. I mean, if you look at Wake County alone, we have 13 House members in Wake County, and they're all in Wake County. Not one House district, is
border. Picks up
goes outside
counties.
the borders of Wake County,
and almost all the Senate districts except for one.
Yeah, except for one. So that keeping counties whole idea is very important.
So I think that's all the time we have. Please join me in thanking Representative Crawford and Rep.Paré. And I will say, as a concluding comment, I've been doing this more or less for 40 years, and I always say this: thank you. The only way that our system of government works is people voluntarily put their name on the ballot. I know, having run campaigns, it's not easy, and very little of it is glamorous, and a lot of it is very frustrating. But thank you. It's the only way it works, and we appreciate you doing it.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
And thank all of you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening, and a big thanks to all three of our guests for making the time to speak with us. Next month, Perspective will be joined by Colin Campbell, the Capitol Bureau Chief for WUNC and host of WUNC's The Politics Podcast, to discuss our last election cycle as well as the future of politics in North Carolina. The podcast is directed by Spencer Bluth. Our producer is Stanley Tirtara Harja. Our photographer is Colton Hankins. Our social media manager is Zane Abdelbeki. A special thanks to Angelina Sulison, who has been instrumental in getting our podcast off the ground. Another special thanks to Elizabeth Godwin, our staff sponsor.